Hello and welcome to today's McMaster University Continuing Education Caregiving Essentials webinar. Caregiving transforms us profoundly and permanently. I would like to begin by acknowledging the land on which we reside. McMaster University recognizes and acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee nations, and within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. My name is Jennifer, and I'll be your host on behalf of McMaster Continuing Education. Today, I'm joined by our facilitators, Donna Thompson and Dr. Ebony Green. I'd like to introduce Donna Thompson. Donna is a caregiver, author, and educator. She is the author of 2 best-selling books on caregiving, including The Unexpected Journey of Caring. Donna also facilitates our free online course for caregivers, Caregiving Essentials. And she is a co-designer and co-instructor of the Family Engagement and Research course, both here at McMaster. And I'd like to introduce Dr. Ebony Green. Dr. Green is a registered nurse and family caregiver. She holds a PhD in human science services with a specialization in healthcare administration. Ebony has extensive experience focusing on caregivers' health and wellness, with an emphasis on caregiver grief, burnout, and related family conflicts. Ebony has contributed to publications and given presentations that focus on training, assessing, and supporting caregivers. Ebony is a published author and has written 3 books focusing on family caregiving: At the Heart of the Matter, Caregiving in the New Millennium, and Reflections from the Soul. Donna, I'll hand things over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here today on National Caregiver Day in Canada. So I want to begin just by saying a couple of things about National Caregiver Day in Canada. So this is a day that has been celebrated on the first Tuesday of April for a number of years now. The celebration is led by Carers Canada, and this year in a partnership with the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence as well. So I wrote a blog. I got up this morning and I wrote a blog post about what I'm hopeful for caregivers moving forward on this day that we're specifically focused on. I guess, you might say hope and despair we've faced with a caregiving crisis in Canada and across the world. But here in Canada, there is an initiative now to bring the caregivers from all disease groups and disability organizations together with frontline paid care workers in one national movement of care. This is the first time this is happening. In other countries, there are movements in the same direction. We are trying to kickstart a national strategy for caregivers in Canada. And I'm very hopeful that we're going to achieve it through the efforts of the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence. So that's one thing I'm hopeful for. And I'm also hopeful that another aligned movement that's taking place is a movement for education of both caregivers and of frontline healthcare professionals as well. So to that end, McMaster Continuing Education has the Caregiving Essentials course, of course, and it's free online. Available for anyone who wants to take it in their own time and earn a McMaster Continuing Education micro-credential. So that's a fantastic thing. And the other item that I wanted to mention too is I see Sharon Anderson in the chat box, and Sharon is here from caregivercare.ca. This is a fantastic program from the University of Alberta. Dr. Jasneet Parmar and Sharon Anderson have developed and co-designed with caregivers, with caregiving leaders in Canada, a suite of educational care training programs for paid care providers and to better learn how to better support caregivers. So that's a fantastic thing for us. We are really happy in Canada that this is available for free. And again, a certificate of completion is available for download after that. It's a great resource. And finally, the other thing that I'm very grateful for is a movement across the world that is about neighborhoods as the unit of support and change. The neighborhood as the unit of support is not a new concept, but the concept has its real home in the asset-based community development movement that was started in Chicago by John McKnight and has grown all over the world. Now, caregivers have looked at the ABCD movement, as it's called, in terms of how do we tell our neighbors and everyone who lives in our neighborhoods, including local institutions and organizations, how do we tell people that we exist in our home, that we have support needs, that we have the need to talk to people, just chat, community belonging, have people deliver food if we need it, drive our kids to school if we need that. And we need the infrastructure to support that kind of activity in neighborhoods. So I want to, draw people's attention to that. That was my other real sign of hope. And the other thing I'm hopeful for today is that Ebony is going to join us because she's not here yet. And I fear that there was a that there was a confusion about time zones. So we've messaged Ebony. I've had lots of email messages from her saying she's very much looking forward to today. So I'm hoping she's going to join us any minute. But I suspect that's why she's not here yet, because she is based in Nebraska, and which is an hour earlier, I think. But in any case, I'm going to share some of Ebony's slides and tell you about the resources and services that she offers through her company, Caregiver Support Services. I know a lot about this because I've known Ebony for many years and been a huge fan of her work. So Ebony started Caregiver Support Services. And I tell you, when I had a close look at the kind of support services that Ebony does offer, not only for individuals, but also for caregiver employees in companies, she and I began to talk, and we began to discuss the tools and resources that we believe are most important to helping caregivers not only survive, but thrive in the role of caregiving. And, one of those resources is called the Caregiver Action Plan. And, when I mentioned to Ebony that we have the Caregiver Action Plan is part of Caregiving Essentials course continuing education, she said, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe that. That's a nursing tool that I also offer caregivers." So I think one of the things that Dr. Ebony Green has done is taken the tools and resources that have evolved in caring for individuals faced with illness or disability in a nursing context and translated them to offer those same tools and resources to family caregivers. This sounds simple, but not very many people are doing this. And it's an enormous gift to people to be able to manage the caregiving project with project management tools. And the Caregiver Action Plan is exactly that. It's a project management tool. And when you come into caregiving, as we all know, we might think that we don't need these tools or that we can make them up on our own. And you cannot know what you do not know going into the caregiving role. So as the expectations of family caregivers have ramped up to be more professional, to be many times we absorb nursing roles and duties, we need tools to manage this. We need to know what is within our control, what is not, where we go to find out how to manage some of these tasks, organizing the very complex kinds of suites of information that we need. This is what we need to find out. And I'm so delighted. Ebony, hi. And I'm
Hi.
so sorry. I bet you thought that we were in the same time zone.
I did.
Well, you know what? I'm sitting here singing your praises and talking to people about the fact that I have been your fan for years online. I've looked suite of resources and supports for family caregivers, not only personally, but also working caregivers that you offer as corporate packages, which is also an innovation that I can't tell you how fantastic I think it is. And I also began by just saying a little bit about a conversation that we had comparing notes about the Caregiver Action Plan and taking the tools and project management tools really from nursing and translating them and giving them to family caregivers so that family caregivers can be project managers and can ease the burden of care through being able to be on top of the organizational tasks. So, Ebony, I would just love to hear from you, first of all, about your company and then about your life. So let's start with the kinds of supports that you offer people through caregiver support services. And by the way, Caregiver Day in Canada.
Wonderful. Well, I am so excited to have the opportunity to talk to you all today and to actually get to see Donna face to face. I'm also a fan of your work and follow you very closely in the things that you're doing. And I'd like to say happy National Caregivers Day to all of you. And so a little bit about Caregiver Support Services. We're a nonprofit organization. My husband and I co-founded the organization. My path to caregiving is a little different in that I started as a nursing assistant, and my goal was to be a nurse and long-term care administrator. And so while I was doing my practicum, for my administrator's license, and working as a social worker designee in a facility, what I started to notice is that there's so many gaps when it comes to individuals being able to locate the services that they need for their loved one. In this case, I was working in a long-term care facility that catered to both individuals with special needs and elders. And so the whole shock of the system of having to figure out the financial aspect of things, the emotional aspect of things, was really challenging for families. So the services that caregiver support services that we offer at Caregiver Support Services really harken back to the things that I thought were most profoundly challenging for families. And so we offer training. We kind of stumbled into that 20 years or so ago, a little more than that. And we offered the nursing assistant and medication aid training in person for individuals who were going to be working with the Respite Resource Center here. And so it may be a family member, a close friend, whomever would be providing the primary care in home would be able to take our training, and then they would have the opportunity to increase their hourly reimbursement from the Medicaid waiver program by $2 an hour. And so that was a really exciting project that we worked on. So we've been offering the training for a long period of time. We're now transitioning that online so we can serve more individuals, more families. And so that's an exciting process. We also offer Emma tool, and our Emma tool is more of a self-help tool for family caregivers. And so, I know from my experience when we were caring for my mother-in-law and father-in-law, different caregiving experiences, the times where I'm most alert is when we should be asleep. And that would be when I would be looking for a resource to share with the family. And so the Emma tool is actually named after my mother-in-law. And it's a questionnaire, quick questionnaire, and it's based on our conceptual wellness. We also offer some wellness resources. We have tools that once you would take the Emma tool and get your results, we give you, this is the area where you're really excelling at as a caregiver with regard to your own personal well-being. And then this is one area for you to focus on to improve your being. And its sources are improving the individual's being and not necessarily the needs of their loved one. So pause there.
So I wonder, Ebony, you're very humble, and I've just put in the chat box, I urge everyone to visit your website because there are so many tools and resources that are available, including the questionnaire. There's self-assessment tools there that can help people understand, as I mentioned before, what do I have? What do I need? What do I know? What do I need to know? These are fundamental questions that we need addressed in order to know how to put one foot in front of the other when faced, with such a complex set of responsibilities, and often ones that are life and death and will keep us awake all night, as you just said. Ebony, I know that your personal caregiving experience has informed your professional work so much. And I wonder if you can tell us just a little bit about your own care experience. It's just amazing that you started as, it was a candy striper, you said, or?
Basically, yes, a nursing assistant.
In a care assistant. You started that way. Then, you became a nurse, I guess, and then you had a intense family caregiver experience. how did these things, what happened in your family, and how did these things weave together to form your work in life today?
So I think that I will first say that I feel very blessed to have had some foundational insight that caregivers need support before I actually had my first, what I would call my first real caregiving situation where things were really up to me. And I will also make the distinction that I feel that it is a very different experience when you're caring for a child versus when you're caring for a loved one that may be your parent or grandparent. And so I will say that although we were providing supplemental care and support for my mother-in-law for many years, my first real induction as a caregiver was when my 16-year-old daughter, who had been very healthy all of her life, I woke up in the middle of the night and I heard, very early in the morning, and I heard a loud thud. So I ran to the 2-year-old's room, and then she was fine. And I ran to our son. He would have been 7 at the time. I ran to his room because he's a hard sleeper and he was okay. And then I went to lay back down, and I went in the kitchen, and my daughter had started having a grand mal seizure. And as a nurse, you think that that's going to kick in your nursing skills. And so it took me a minute to gather myself and to, make sure that she was okay. She had fallen basically face forward in the kitchen and started having the seizure. And so our journey from there was the emergency room. And I just remember, holding it all together. I was riding in the front of the ambulance, and I could hear when they were bringing her out of the back, she was saying, "Where's my mom?" That was what she said when she first came out of it. And so we went to the hospital, and I just remember, I'll be very honest with you, I just remember crying and praying that we would know what it is that's causing the seizures. And so she had an MRI, and I kind of held it together until she went to have the MRI, and I was just bawling. And a lady that was doing housekeeping walked by, and she didn't say anything, but she just rubbed me across my shoulder, and she handed me a Kleenex,
Oh,
and she handed me the box of Kleenex, and we made eye contact, and she left the room. And so my daughter Asia, she had what was called a gangliocytoma, and it's a brain tumor that is often found in, often identified in pediatrics. And it was benign, and we ended up having it removed, but it was a 1.5 years of constant not knowing, and and really working to, I don't know how I made it through, really working to figure out what was the best thing for her. And so she's been tumor free, like maybe earlier this week or the end of last week, she posted a announcement and said that it's been 14 years. So I don't know how we got through
gosh.
that,
Oh,
but we did as a family. And so that was my induction. I think I was more prepared for, as far as understanding what we needed to do as a family, when my mother-in-law, she'd had a heart condition for many years, probably before my husband and I even met. And so she got a really bad strain of the flu. And as a result of that, she ended up having a stroke. And so it was many months of hospital and then transition from hospital to long-term care. But by that time, we'd worked on a tool for the caregiver action, as a part of the caregiver action plan, on how to sit down and have a conversation with your family. And we actually used that tool to identify our caregiver related strengths and to understand what I'm more comfortable with. Like, I don't mind doing personal cares or medication or things like that. My husband is really great when it comes to talking to, the business people and the legal type things and financial matters. My brother-in-law, transportation. So we kind of split things out, and that made it more manageable, although you still have all of the emotions and the other challenges that come with watching, going through the health system. And sometimes you've got to be really firm. And I feel very blessed that, again, because I'm kind of a nicey person, and my husband is nice too, but doesn't have a problem with being professionally firm. And so to have someone to be able to step in when you've reached your limit is always a nice thing.
Oh, yes. Oh, gosh. I relate to what you're talking about on so many different levels. Our son has epilepsy too, so it's one of his multiple myriad of medical challenges. But it was very, very scary at first when he had his first seizure. I'm so glad your daughter is on the other side of this, it would seem, and may it always be so. I wanted to mention, there's so much interesting chat going on here in the chat, and someone is mentioning there is a hospital chaplain here today, and I'm not sure if it's a man or a woman, but they say, I remember reading a study about who was most helped to hospital patients: the doctors, nurses, physios, social workers, chaplain, and the patient's response, the cleaning staff.
Mm-hmm.
These are the people who are at bedside, often, not always in a hurry, able to chat, not putting sort of a clinical delivery task first. They put the chat first. And so sometimes these people can have a profound effect on our healthcare experiences, on often what are the worst days of our lives, because they are kind. And the other thing I thought of, Ebony, as you were speaking, talking about dividing tasks amongst family members, is I was talking a little bit at the beginning of today's webinar about the asset-based community development movement, which is seeking to galvanize neighborhoods to create the infrastructure so that we can better support each other on a micro local level, hyper local. And one of the things that the ABCD movement challenges people to ask themselves are three questions. What can I or would I like to do myself, by myself? What do I need a little bit of help with? And what can I not do at all? I need someone else to do. And I think these questions are really good questions that you have spoken to in telling your story of your family, about how do you describe yourself, your husband and his talents, and how can he be most helpful? What are the conversations that I have to have this week that I really wish somebody else would just deal with? I don't want to do it. And of course, those answers are going to be different for everyone. I'm wondering if you can reflect a little bit on support, the idea of caregiver support. What constitutes in your mind, Ebony, good support? What does good support look like?
To me, I think it is definitely going to pull you back, or at least pull me back to my thoughts on nursing and identifying again where your strengths lie. Because what I find is not that so much that family members don't want to help, and that what I do find is that they often don't know how to help. And a lot of those of us who are primary caregivers are type A personalities. So we have a specific way that we want things done. And sometimes that's just not possible. So I think what good support looks like is getting the family members that your core group together and discussing with your loved one what their unmet needs are. And then identifying who is able to do what and holding that person accountable, whether or not that means that they're going to personally perform the task or they're going to hire someone to perform that particular task. And then I will also say two other things. Number one, I can say that my social network completely changed when Asia was diagnosed with the brain tumor. My network of friends that were still able to get together for girls' trips and just didn't know how to talk to me about the things that were going on in my life at that time. And when I think back on it, I think about how I really did in some major ways, although I had tons of family support, feel very isolated. I felt very socially isolated. And I stay in close contact with those friends still. We're sisters. But as far as the things that they're doing, the memories that they made while I was going through that experience, I wasn't a part of that. And sometimes that feels really lonely. And so I think having the opportunity when your parent or child is in a stable enough situation to make the time to go and just be with your friends, and during that time not talk much about the caregiving situation that you're experiencing, and just enjoy being with your friends. It's one of those things of where we're always talking about take care of yourself, and we're always reminding caregivers to put on their mask first, and we mean that. But I think it's hard sometimes to know what to do, and that would be my big takeaway from that experience, is to make sure that I stay socially connected as much as possible with family and with close friends. And then the other thing is to have that time that is just for you to do something. It may be, I love a hot bath. So it might be something like a hot bath, or I don't go out a whole lot. So my thing is like, going to the nail shop, or finding a space where I could go and just read something that I really want to read. Sometimes getting a magazine that has nothing to do with anything that you just a terrible gossip magazine. And reading that, so because we get so serious and we get so pulled into, and rightly so, but those would be the things that I would say: having a good team, setting it up from the beginning, telling people, as you mentioned, what your team, what you are comfortable with and what you do need help with, and then giving them the space to perform those tasks the way that they're going to perform. You got to let it go. if you're going to delegate, keeping the connection with your friends. And when you're doing that, not spending the majority of your time talking about the challenges, because there are really excellent groups and such that you can belong to where you can talk with other caregivers. And it doesn't mean hide it, but don't make that the center of the experience. And then just doing that one or two things that you need to do for yourself is very, very important. Sure. I would also say that we would want to have an opportunity or take the opportunity to connect with our spiritual aspect of ourselves. And I'm not necessarily really talking about the religious aspect of things, but really that spiritual aspect of what it is that you are doing as a caregiver. I find that to be very important. And that's one of the reasons why when we're looking at the caregiver questionnaire for the caregiver action plan, it's really, what are your spiritual gifts related to caregiving? And so
The one thing that I wanted to ask you about was post-traumatic growth. You and I have both experienced trauma in our caregiving. I have had PTSD. I've talked a lot about that and involved in research projects around caregiver PTSD and trauma. And I have my own ideas about what's helped me achieve some degree of post-traumatic growth. But what has helped you, and what do you believe are some of the real building blocks of post-traumatic growth, Ebony?
This is such an interesting area, and I'm so pleased that you're doing conducting research in the area of post-traumatic growth. I will say that when I first started to reflect on post-trauma, I really was looking at post-traumatic stress in relation to loss. And when I mean loss, I mean when someone passes away. And so I really wasn't thinking about my personal experience, although I do have PTSD. But what I was looking at the time, I was working on a book about grief. And I will share with you that my mother and her sister, she has 3 sisters, her closest sister and her were 2 years apart, best friends their entire lives. My aunt, Linda, she had Crohn's disease her entire, from the time she was a young girl, maybe early teens on, and had a successful military career. And then toward the time when she was getting ready to retire and live her, her next level of dreams, she was diagnosed with leukemia. And then her leukemia went into remission. And then when it came back, the cancer came back. She had like a football size tumor on one of her, I want to say it was one of her ovaries. So she had been a person of faith and a really good person. And so when my mom went to see her and she was toward the end of life, and my aunt was in such pain and was so scared when she was a person of faith, it really shook my mom to her core. And she had been a very successful lawyer in California, big, beautiful home and all of the things that come with living a good, successful life. And when my aunt died, she lost faith.
Oh.
And so she really had a struggle with how person who had been so good their entire life could suffer so. And then she had a questioning of God and your higher power, and how does that, and it really just one strand after another, it just unraveled her life. And so when I was really looking at post-traumatic stress responses, I was looking at it in relation to grief. And it has taken, and I remember talking to my mom a lot about, these are things that you're experiencing as a result of caring for Aunt Linda and, questioning. You have a relationship that, these are my thoughts, but you have a relationship with God, and that means sometimes you and him don't agree, and he can handle it. And so, but it has taken a really long time. And I would say probably in the last year, my aunt passed away in 2007. So probably in the last year, she's been able to kind of start living again. But it took a really long time. My post-traumatic stress is from things that occurred in childhood, but also to have a perfectly healthy child. And then all of a sudden you have someone who is, you're in and out of the hospital, and you're just trying to figure out what is going on. And the answers that you're getting from the doctor, especially when you're a mom, is, oh, you're an anxious person anyway. So, she's going to be fine. It's just your anxiety. And, and so not really listening to me when I'm saying, no, I can see she's breaking out. So I know that the next step is going to be a full allergic reaction, and let's do something now. And so thankfully I have my husband to come in so that he can relay those messages, but not everybody has that. And so my way of dealing with and working through my post-traumatic experience was to do work on that study for my dissertation, was on wellness, and to look at what it means to be well, as what components and what do caregivers find meaningful with regard to caregiving, and what supports do they need to be able to take care of themselves. And that's kind of what Emma, which is named after my mom, is born out of. My mother-in-law is born out of.
Well, there's so much in what you've just said. In terms of, the fact that we are the product of our experiences, and our lives don't just begin the minute we start caregiving. I mean, we did a national survey of parents of children with complex needs in Canada, looking at the prevalence of PTSD in that population. And, I think if you did the same survey in adult children of parents with Lewy body dementia or Huntington's disease, something like that, you would find the same, roughly the same numbers. The prevalence was high of people, particularly, parents who had to do life-saving procedures on, like, CPR on their kids, as I have done. But the thing is that those parents also had other traumas in their lives, early traumas. And myself, my PTSD was a combination of traumatic events. The first one being that my father had 3 strokes and lost his speech and mobility when I was about 15.
Wow.
And I was home alone with him one day when it was similar to what happened with your daughter. I heard a funny noise down the hall. And my dad, it just didn't sound normal at all. And so I walked, or kind of ran out of my bedroom And I ran down the hall and I looked at him, and he was sitting in an armchair in our living room, and he was shaking, his head was back, his eyes were rolled back, he was incontinent. I thought that my father was having another stroke, and I was seeing him die. And so I called an ambulance. Anyway, long story short, it was a seizure. It wasn't a stroke. And they told me, like they said to you, about your anxiety, they said, oh, well, strokes are very normal. Seizures are very normal in people with stroke. So that was supposed to make me feel that my reaction was overblown. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
So then fast forward to 1990, my son was 2, and it was his very first day of preschool. We know now that stress is a trigger for seizures with him, but he was off to school for the very first time in his little life. And I got a call around 10 o'clock when I was reading that gossipy magazine for the first 2 minutes of respite in my life, to that in his life. And the phone rang, and it was the head teacher saying, your son, Nicholas, has had a seizure. He's in the ambulance, unresponsive. You need to meet him at the emergency room. So, it turned out that he didn't die. He didn't have a personality change, all of this. He was okay, but it was the beginning of, more seizures. Anyway, after that, every single time the phone rang at home, I would have a panic attack, even if Nicholas was in my arms and I knew that he was fine. I did not know that PTSD is a problem of memory, that we experience multiple traumas over time, and they form a building block effect. So somebody like you and me, I think it's natural as competent, smart, kind of hardworking people that we believe that we should get better at managing trauma in caring, but we don't. No. We get more, it doesn't take me very much to get knocked down become immobilized by panic and anxiety today, because I've had too much trauma. And now, whoa, if I hear a whiff of an emergency, oh my God, I think, oh my God, what am I going to do? And so that's hard, but
it is, it really
yeah,
is.
It's all very hard. And there isn't, a lot of support for this. Thank goodness you have created a suite of supports. I think training is a big thing that gives us a kind of armor against being completely shattered by these experiences. But another thing I want to just allude to is this idea of post-traumatic growth in not only in understanding ourselves better, because when I participated as a parent partner in that research project, I forgave myself so much because I understood now what I was experiencing. And so in terms of just understanding ourselves, making meaning of our experiences, for me personally, a lot of the writing that I've done in my first book, The 4 Walls of My Freedom, and then the Unexpected Journey of Caring that I co-wrote with Dr. Zachary White, these books have been a very fun investigation of lots of other people's ideas and gathering of information that I filtered through my personal experience and thought, what does this tell me about my life? What is the meaning anyway of a life that is completely devoted to caring? What is the meaning of caregiving? Does anybody even care except me? And, how can I talk about it? And for me, so journaling, writing my blog, writing something every day, and also for me, also being in nature, sitting by the lake, sitting by
Oh,
the
yeah.
sea, sitting in the woods, calming myself, looking at something very particular, staring at a spot in nature, help me calm down. These are the things that help me achieve a sense of calm and hope and a feeling that, like that little leaf opening, that I'm growing from this, not dying from it.
I really appreciate what you just said in its entirety, that we are, many of us, at least I can say you and I, from hearing what you were just saying about PTSD and growing. I've been very quiet the last few months on most of my social media, not because there's not a lot going on, but this time, fall time last year, 2022, I lost my father. And so you put that, and he was my person.
Yeah.
So I had to learn to do some things different, because the first year when he passed away, we had Thanksgiving, and I just tried to do things the normal way. And I was a mess for the next few months. And so I really worked very closely with my therapist, because you don't know when you have PTSD and you are a caregiver, you don't necessarily know what's going to trigger you. And then you don't always know what is exactly going to help you soothe and get back to a stable situation. So we know that, like you're saying, going out in nature. I have a little pond that we have in our front yard, and I have a bench, and I live in Nebraska, so a lot of the time it doesn't have any little fishies and stuff in it, but in the summer we take great care to do that, and that really helps me. And what I spent this last quarter, I would say, doing is writing. And then you do have those moments where you reflect and you say, okay, I'm creating these pathways for other caregivers so that they don't feel alone, and they don't have to experience the things that I'm experiencing, and we can learn from one another. And then you have those moments where you wonder, well, is what I'm doing meaningful?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's very challenging.
But I just wanted to come back to this idea of meaning making, and your description of the shock of trying to do Thanksgiving without your father. I find that so moving. My daughter is doing her PhD at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and she's doing the history of disability design studies, and
Oh, wow.
it's really interesting. Anyway, she did a paper about a painting called The Empty Chair, and it was an early painting. It was a Civil War painting where the soldier did not return, and it's a mother at the table by herself. I think, we have to sit with that. We have to
Mhm.
sit with that. And I remember when my mom died in 2018, she was 96 and she had lived for about 10 years with dementia. But my mom was a really powerful, funny, difficult, stubborn person. She was a huge character. And honestly, I thought, me and my sister, we just thought she would never die. We thought she was just going to live like forever because of the strength of her personality. Um, anyway, we got the call that she had died in her sleep. And it was such a shock. Even at 96. I mean,
Mhm.
I remember writing her obituary, and I said, Marjorie Thompson Higginson died unexpectedly at the age of 96. And I remember my husband saying, I don't think you should say unexpectedly at 96. I said, but it was. And, after my sister and I were at the cottage and we drove back home and we started to get to the practical work of someone in the family dying. And I went down to the river near where we lived and I just sat there by myself watching the river. And the thought in my head was, who was my mother? Who was she? How can I begin to describe her? Because the stories that I had told, want to hear a story about my mom and this is who, but when she died, it was way more complicated than that.
Mhm.
And I had to reconcile myself, my efforts to keep her well and alive, the times that I had walked out um, the fights we had when I was a teenager, the whole thing came sort of smashing in.
Mhm.
And I thought, what is the meaning of my mom to me? What did I think I meant to her? What is the story? What's the narrative? And so I sat there for a really long time and I thought to myself, I'm not going to know this for a while.
Mhm.
I'm going to have a lot of conversations with my sister, and I'm going to have to be patient for the meaning to come to me. And it did, and I think we each find our way to meaning, but we have to, I think one thing that's true about all of this is figuring out grief, figuring out loss, figuring out trauma is that we need to be patient, but we need to be intentional to seek it. And so speaking with other caregivers, I think is helpful. Sitting in silence is helpful. Writing is helpful. And asking other people in the family, for me, that was helpful too. Like, what are you thinking and feeling right now?
Donna, one of the things I think was most difficult with losing my dad is that I'm an only child.
Mm.
And so I have cousins, one in particular that I'm super close. We call ourselves sister cousins. We've been together for every memorable experience. I'm thankful for that. But it's challenging when you feel as though you're kind of isolated in your grief. And my stepmother she's a retired flight surgeon from the Air Force. And so I remember talking to her not long after my dad passed. And she said, because my dad was a Marine. So she's like, we're tough, we're Marines. And I'm like, no, I'm not at all uh, tough. and it took a little while for things to set in with her, but it can be very isolating. What has helped me specifically with my dad this past 2022 Thanksgiving, I told my kids in advance that our youngest is 15, and then we have older adult children. So our oldest daughter, I said, hey, our daughter Taryn is going to come to your house, and you host your brothers and everyone, and we are going to a hotel. And so we did that. And then I started writing, but there's this really great movie. I'm into these types of movies, The Last Samurai. And there's a part at the end where I won't go all the way into it, but there's a part at the end that's very meaningful. And so the captain goes in to talk to Tom Cruise goes in to talk to the emperor, and it's a really great visual and everything story. And the emperor says to Tom Cruise's character, were you with him at the end? And he says, yes. And he says, tell me how he died. And then Tom Cruise says, I'll tell you how he lived. And so the thing that when I would get really down over the holidays, I would say to myself, tell me how he lived. And since my dad lived such, in my opinion, such a beautiful life, that really sometimes is the thing that helps pull me out, because I don't feel like I have persons that are experiencing his loss as intensely as I am. But that took time, like you're saying, to figure out what is it going to be that's going to help me honor him, but also help me move forward. And I think we're always doing that in caregiving, that we're looking at how we're going to honor and make sure that our loved ones are being cared for in a manner that is focused with dignity and love. But also, how are we going to manage the emotions that sometimes arise, and understand that, and have the understanding that you don't know what's going to trigger you to have a response. And it's okay to go to the car and cry. You're not doing anything wrong in owning your emotions, because I feel like that sometimes too, I don't know, I'd really like to see how many of us are type A personality people, where we feel like if we map it out and plan it out, it's all going to go this way, and then we won't have to deal with the emotions, and then it doesn't work that way, and we're readjusting. And so finding that meaning and that one little thing that's going to help you make it through that next phase is vitally important. And we don't always know what that's going to be.
No, that's so true. That's so true. Everything that you've just said. And it's tell me how he lived, I think, is such a beautiful way to stay afloat, with centering love and life and vitality at the center of our story, and the meaning of a relationship that includes caregiving, but it also includes so much more. I mean, I can only, get a glimpse of who your father was to you and my dad was to me. He was a wonderful man, and I would love to tell anyone who will listen how he lived too. And he died in 1975, and part of caring for him now involves sharing those memories. I'm still caring for him that way. So, I know that there's been such a rich chat today and
Yeah.
a lot of emotional response to, and a lot of questions too. I hope that people will come back every month. We always have a rich discussion with a huge variety of wonderful and wise caregiving thought leaders like you, Ebony. It's just been a great pleasure for me personally to speak with you today, something that I've been wanting to do for a long time. And I'm so glad that we had this opportunity. Thank you so much. And I want to wish everyone here today a very happy National Caregiver Day. Celebrate yourself in some way. Read a funny magazine, just look at the pictures, and maybe have an extra scoop of ice cream or something to treat yourself.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, absolutely. And just enjoy and give yourself a huge pat on the back. And even better than that, tell somebody else, you know what? I'm a caregiver. It's National Caregiver Day. Pat me on the back, please, now.
Yeah.
Tell me I'm beautiful. Tell me I'm smart. Whatever makes you feel good. I think we should draw that positive attention towards ourselves and draw attention to the important and vital role that caregivers play in our society today. So thank you. And I'd like to pass the mic back over to Jennifer.
Hey, thank you, Donna. Thank you, Dr. Ebony Green, for a wonderful session today. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and a happy National Caregivers Day.